Hello students, welcome to Learner's Planet. Let us now continue with the topic tissues. We had started with this chapter titled tissues. Tissues, they are the group of similar cells which are coordinating together to perform the same function. In the previous sessions we have ended up with the plant tissues, and now we are going to start with the animal tissues. See, the basic difference between the animals and the plants that we have studied already in the first session of this chapter is that plants, they were autotrophic and they are stationary, whereas the animals, they are heterotrophic in nature, and secondly they can move from one place to another. So basically these organisms, as they cannot synthesize their own food, they are dependent on the autotrophic organisms. So when they are obtaining the food from the other organisms, then they need a particular design of their own structure which can support its survival. Next is that if they cannot prepare it for themselves, they need to move around in search of its food, as well as for the shelter and for the mating partners, that is for the reproduction purposes. So in short, the entire constitution of these animals is entirely different from those of the plant tissues. So these are therefore there is a basic differences, the different types among the animals. In the case of plants, we have studied that the tissues were classified on the basis of its dividing capacity into meristematic tissues and the permanent tissues. Such classification is not observed in case of animal tissues. They have a uniform cell division capacity, which is required so as to maintain the constant energetic functions of the animals. So among the animals, the classification is very much different from that of the plant tissues. Here, the tissues are broadly classified into 4 categories, depending on their function, depending on the structure where they are supporting it. So let us have a brief idea about this. The first class is epithelial tissue. So epithelial tissue is basically, it is forming the outer lining of the animal organs, we can say, or different parts of the animals. In the plants, we have studied about a protective layer. That protective layer is known as epidermis. Now, in case of animals, this protective layer is generated by the epithelial tissues. Can you make any difference here now? Both these tissues in animals as well as in the case of plants, they are meant for protection. So why is it so that in the case of plant, this protective layer is known as epidermis, and here it is known as epithelial tissue or epithelium? The reason is that in case of plants, epidermis is located only in the external part of the system. In the case of animals, this epithelial lining is found in almost all over the external part of the body, that is its skin, as well as the inner organs. Even they are having these epithelial tissue. Even they are protected from each other. They have been separated from each other because of the presence of this boundary line. So this boundary line of internal organs is also produced by this protective layer. And this is why we are not simply calling it as epidermis, rather we are calling it as an epithelial tissue. Next is muscular tissue. So these muscular tissue, they are required for the purpose of movement. Now movement, as we have already studied, that these movements, they can be easily visualized or they can be invisible. Can you quote some example? Can you think of certain examples of movement in living organisms? An organism can change their position. They can move from one place to the another. So such type of movement, that means transfer from one place or location to the another, is known as locomotion. Besides, within the internal system, many movements are continuously taking place even when we are sitting at a particular site or a position. Your heart is beating, right? So how this heart is beating? Because of the contraction and relaxation of the muscular tissues. You are breathing in and out. How? Because your respiratory system is functioning inside. Now how you are breathing in? With the help of your diaphragm and the ribs. See, your diaphragm and ribs, they are supported by the muscles which pull them outside and downward, due to which the lung gets space to get filled up with the air. When air is filled inside the lungs, they will swell up. But if something is swelling up, it needs some space. From where it is obtained? Because of the outward and downward movement of the ribs as well as the dome-shaped structure, that is your diaphragm. So movement is present. It is taking place continuously inside your body also. Blood. It is flowing from, we can say, one part to the another body part. Continuously this circulation of blood is taking place. So all these movements are basically possible because of the presence of muscular tissue in our various regions. Then further, there is a presence of connective tissue. As we are moving from one part to the another, then don't you think your structure should get dislocated? It is not happening. A particular organ is placed at a particular position forever. Your stomach is present in the abdominal cavity towards the left hand side, right? Now, can you think? If you run, it should jump somewhere, it should go to another position. That is not happening. Why? Because it is the surrounding area is actually supported by the connective tissue. The spaces in surrounding is filled up with the supportive type of tissue that is known as connective tissue. Not only this much, this connective tissue helps in the coordination, connection between different parts of the bodies. Like your skeleton, right? We are having around 206 bones in our body which are fixed at a particular position. How? This bone itself is an example of a connective tissue. Then they are connected with each and every other, different bones. How? Because of the connective tissue. Blood. It helps in transport of different materials. How? Because itself is a connective tissue. So it is actually, this connective tissue is supporting the body by connecting different parts of the body with each other. Besides, all these functions, they have to be coordinated. They have to be taken place in a very designed manner or in a very coordinated form. So such type of control and coordination is a function of nervous tissue. There is a transmission process taking place. There is a message which is conveyed from one part to the other, and then signal is given that this action is supposed to be taken. For example, you are listening to the session, suppose, and then you are listening from your ear, it is going to your brain, and then you are getting this answer from your brain that what response to be given. Whether you understand it or not, different expressions, different actions would be generated. Now from where this command is coming? So it is basically possible because of the transmission of messages between the different parts of the body. So that transmission is a function of a nervous tissue. So these are the outline, or these are the major categories of the animal tissues. Let us see the location of each tissue now in the body. We said the nervous tissue, the last category. Now this nervous tissue is meant for the transmission of messages. Where is it located? The very good example is the brain. The brain is made up of nervous tissue, nerves, spinal cord. All are made up of nervous tissue, and they help in conveying the message and receiving the message from different parts or in different ways. Then we can say connective tissue. These parts are basically filled up with the connective tissue. See, these are the muscles here, skeletal muscle, and within the skeletal muscle there will be the presence of connective tissue. The different bones, those bones, they must be having connective tissue within them. Besides there is a skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, smooth muscle. That means different kind of muscles are present for different kind of movements, as we have introduced in the previous slide. Like from location, for that skeletal muscle is participating. For circulation of blood or the functioning of heart, cardiac muscle is participating, so it is present in the heart. Skeletal, as it is meant for change in location, so it must be present in the limbs. It is associated with the bones present in the limbs. Then comes the smooth muscle, the functioning of internal organs like intestine, like stomach. How these smooth muscles are needed here? Because if such contraction or relaxation will not take place, then the food from your mouth is not able to pass into the alimentary canal. It is these smooth muscle in the esophagus which help in transporting food from esophagus to stomach, then to small intestine, then to large intestine. So these are actually having smooth muscles over there. Then the epithelial tissue, the outer layer. Outer layer of what? The skin. Suppose this is a stomach, then this outer lining of a stomach is made up of epithelial tissue. Even inner lining is also covered by the epithelial tissue. But the nature of this outer lining and the inner lining is supposed to be different. If it is the outer lining, then it is basically separating this part of alimentary canal from the surrounding tissues and the organs and the fluid. The internal lining is actually designed in such a way that it can produce the mucus, the enzymes, secretion containing HCl and all. So the nature of both lining, internal and outer lining, is supposed to be different. So now let us study about each and every kind of tissue in more and more detail. So let us begin with the first category, that is epithelial tissue. So epithelial tissue, these are the most simplest form of the animal tissue. Epithelial, epi, it means the outermost layer of the body or the organ. So now outermost, if we are saying and there is a cavity inside, then outermost is not merely towards outer side. It is the innermost and the outermost lining of the organs as well as the outer covering of the body, that is skin. Basically, these tissues are known as protective tissue of the animal body. How? Suppose there is a presence of skin over your body. Not suppose, it is of course present in each and every body. So how these skin is functioning here? They protect our inner part of the body. It is an envelope which is present over your body. It protects us. It won't allow the external material to directly diffuse inside, or it is forming a barrier between the external environment and the inner body constitution of the body, of course. So these cells which are forming such a protective tissue here, they are tightly packed and they form a continuous sheet-like structure. You can see in this diagram, these are cells. You can see here, they are made up of different cells which are tightly packed. Can you see any space in between these two cells here? No. So actually there is no space in between the two adjacent cells. But now think of it again, that like these cells are placed closely to each other, and how they are held with each other? They are being held together by a cementing substance in between. So these two layers, the junction of these two cell membrane is filled up with the cement substance here. I'm sorry, the labeling here S is missing. So basically it is substance. Then we can just write it here actually. The word letter S is missing here. So it is a substance. Now these cells or these type of covering, they actually covers the organs and the cavities within the body. Now we must clarify this point very peculiarly. We have already said that epithelial tissue is meant for forming the outer protective layer as well as the inner protective layer. Let us see here in the diagram now. See, this is the structure of a stomach. Before I explain this point here, that how this lining is present, just mind one thing. That if we are saying that epithelial tissue is present here in the stomach, then it doesn't mean that it is entirely made up of epithelial tissue only. No, Each and every class that we have studied in the first slide, each one is present in this particular region, almost each. So let us say how these are present here. Now this is the outer part. See, this is the point which is actually what? It is a part known as esophagus. It is the bottom region of the, or the posterior most side of the esophagus, which opens down in the stomach. Now the outer lining of this structure, this is the outer epithelium. Whereas if we cut this section, the hollow space would be seen here. Now this hollow space is filled up with some material, and the inner lining of this organ is made up of what? It is made up of epithelial tissue. So they are having outer, and the outer and inner part of the stomach or any other part is having this epithelial lining. But now just try to observe, the outer lining of this stomach is smooth in nature, whereas the inner lining of this is something different. So from this point, a particular thing is very much clear, that each lining is having different nature now. The outer one is just serving here as a barrier. It is covering this particular stomach and is forming a barrier so as to keep this body system separate from the other one. Now what about this inner lining? It is separating the inner cavity and from this particular stomach, but sidewise it is meant for the secretion purpose. Secretion of what? Secretion of a fluid known as gastric juice. Or we can say it is forming the mucus so as to protect this lining, which is not the role of outer epithelium. Inner is having, therefore we are saying the inner and outer are very different from each other. And all these different types we will of course study in the further part of the same session. Now besides this epithelium, they are forming just outer and inner linings here. Now what about the other part of this thing? They are made up of smooth muscles. They are having the muscles so as to perform the churning of food inside, so as to push it forward, so as to cycle it inside so that it can be masticated properly. It can be mixed up with the secretion produced by the inner epithelial lining. Then they are comprised of loose connective tissue. They need constant energy. They must be supplied with the blood. Blood is a kind of connective tissue. Besides this, the space is present in a different type of tissues or the cells or the body or the different part of the stomach. So that space is supposed to be filled, else it will be a plumpy type structure. But that is not, it is compactly packed stomach. So that compactness, that tightness or the structural integrity of this structure is actually made by the loose connective tissue. Now if more and more fat cells deposit in this connective tissue, then we appears to be fatty in this abdominal region. So in short, what we want to say here is that whatever body part is there, it is having all the different kind of tissues, and thus all these different type of tissues perform a same function together, and thus they form the organ. So this single organ, stomach, is comprised of all these different kind of tissues. But we are right now studying about the epithelial tissue, so let us continue the same point. The outer epithelium and the inner epithelium, both the boundary lines are formed here, which are functioning as a barrier so as to keep the stomach away from the different other parts of the body. Besides this, these linings are also formed in different parts, like they are forming the skin. Your skin is made up of epithelial tissue. Then it is present in the lining of different cavities. You know where the cavity is present? As we said, in the alimentary canal. That, like, let's say the buccal cavity, that is oral cavity. Oral cavity is a part of alimentary canal, so it is covered with the epithelial lining. Blood vessels, vessels which are hollow from inside. So something is flowing inside, that there should be a boundary line over it. Externally, internally, both. So these linings are made up of epithelial tissue, like alveoli, kidney tubules. all these are having the lining which is made up of epithelial tissue. You can imagine that whichever is the body part, the external and internal outline is comprised of epithelial tissue. And of course, along with that, it is having different all other kind of tissue so as to maintain itself, so as to perform its own functions properly. Next is, let us understand different types of epithelial tissue. They can be simple or they can be stratified. What does it mean now? It means that the simple tissue means it is forming a single layer. There is a single baseline over which the cells are being present. Now, how these cells are arranged, that is subclassifying the epithelial tissue. Suppose if it is forming a single lining over this membrane, then it is known as simple epithelial tissue. Now, if suppose these tissues, they are arranged in multiple layers or they are forming several layers over this base membrane, then these will be known as stratified. Suppose like this, they are arranged one above the other. So this type in which the cells are arranged in multiple layers are known as stratified epithelial tissue. Simple or stratified. Now they can be of various kinds depending upon the site where it is present and the function which it is going to serve as. So function which is performed will subclassify the epithelium into various types. Let us study each and every type now. So the first type is squamous. These squamous tissue, they are meant for protection purpose. Now it is your job now that you imagine where the protection is needed. So where they should be located. If we say the epithelium is serving as a protective layer, where it should be present? One of the example is your skin. Another example, let us say the inner lining of your, we can say, cavities, stomach, the inner lining, from what it needs a protection? A stomach is meant for secreting the acid. Now, if acid is generated, it will damage the inner lining. So, in this case, the epithelium is designed in such a way that it can be protected from the acidic conditions. So, such type would be made up of squamous tissue. This epithelium, when it is serving for protection reasons, it is known as squamous tissue, squamous epithelium tissue. Then cuboidal, the regions which are involved in absorption, secretion and excretion functions, those regions are covered by the special epithelial lining known as cuboidal epithelial tissue. Then columnar tissue, these are meant for absorption and secretion purposes. Like intestine, they are meant for secretion as well as for absorption and secretion both. Then comes glandular, where it is secreting out certain fluid which is, we can say, like containing different elements so as to support the functioning of the body. Like of course a stomach is one of the examples. Thyroid gland. So these glands are secreting either hormones or the enzymes or various material. Then comes the ciliated epithelial lining. Now these cilia, you know what we mean by cilia? Minute hair-like projections present over the surface. So these projections, when they move to and fro, they will help in the movement of particles in particular direction. So can you think that where it may be needed? Your nose, the nasal epithelial lining, the nasal cavity. What is the purpose? Air is inhaled, then the particle or these are supposed to be pushed out. See, suppose let us say it is having suppose some dust particles or some minute particles which should not be entered inside the lungs. So these cilia, they will help in pushing these particles towards outside. On the other hand, we can say like in the case of reproductive system, ovum which is produced or it is generated by the ovaries is supposed to be transported into the fallopian tube. How it will go? due to the presence of ciliated epithelium in those regions. So in short, we can just conclude one thing here, that all these different epithelial tissues, wherever they are present, they are serving a specific function. So now let us study about the squamous epithelium or squamous epithelial tissue. See, the difference here must be noted. Simple squamous epithelium could be simple or it may be complex, depending on the site where it is present and what type of protection it is providing. Not only squamous, the other types can be simple as well as stratified. Means what? That means they can be arranged in a single layer or they can be arranged in multiple layers. So this squamous epithelial tissue, it is made up of thin, flat, irregular shaped cells. They are thin, flat as well as irregular. Now these irregular shaped structures, they are tightly packed. They are not loosely packed here. They form the compact layering in the part wherever it is present. So you can see the diagram here. Now these are somehow irregular shaped structures which are closely located. Just imagine one thing. When we are saying that they are irregular shaped and we are saying they are compactly packed, then don't you think that when some irregular shaped structures are placed together, some internal gaps would be generated? What do you say? So like even you can see it here. Although we are saying that these are present over here, let us say this way, they are irregular and placed compactly, but these spaces are present here. See, you can see here in the diagram. So how they are tightly packed now? How these spaces are maintained now? They are maintained due to the presence of a cementing material in between. Again, the spelling mistake is here. I am very sorry. It is substance. So these cementing substance will fill the gap present in between these irregular shaped cells. So therefore, now these special structures will appear like a floor which is furnished with the tiles. How the tiles are arranged? The gap in between is filled up with the cement. So similarly, the same look would be observed when we see the top view of these squamous cells or the squamous epithelium. So now, what do you think? Where these must be present? So they are actually forming the delicate lining of the cavities. We can say like mouth, esophagus, alveoli, nose, pericardium, all these structures, they are having cavities, right? And the lining of these cavities is actually covered by this epithelium, squamous epithelium. Even it is supported by different kind of epithelial tissue wherever it is needed. Like when it is needed for secretion, it is covered by, it is supported by different type of tissue. But here, most of these regions are having these type of epithelial lining. Now not only cavity, the structures like esophagus, it is a part of alimentary canal. The internal part may have this cavity is having this squamous tissue here, but in surrounding they are also covered by the similar layer, epithelial tissue, and there it is supporting or it is serving as a barrier between the esophagus and other surrounding structures like trachea or any other part present in its surrounding. Not only in esophagus, each part is having this type of function. Besides this, it is present around the blood vessels. That means the outer lining of blood vessels is also made up of squamous epithelial tissue. It forms a covering of the tongue and the skin. See, these tissues might be a little bit confusing for you, but if you revise it and you think about it, that what type of function it is serving, then you can easily locate that at what point they must be present. So just try hard and study well with the help of these sessions. You can see here in this diagram, these are the cavities. Stomach is empty inside, then esophagus, which is not shown here directly but it is present over there, then skin. All these are covered by the epithelial linings only. Now here, if we compare the lining present in the skin and the lining of suppose this stomach, the outer lining of the stomach, then there must be some difference here. What the difference is that in the case of skin, it is made up of stratified epithelial tissue, whereas in the case of inner linings here, it is made up of simple epithelial lining. So in the case of skin, the cells are arranged in the multiple layers. They are increasing the thickness of the skin so that they can protect us from some mechanical injury or the transport of surrounding material into the interior of the body. So in short, we can say they are also having the hairs generated over its surface. So there are various modifications also in these tissues with respect to the site it is present and the function or the role played by the tissue in that part. We can just summarize these functions here now. The function is that the major is protection, as we have already said. So protection of what? Protection of the underlying parts of the body from mechanical injury. So as if skin is present, it protects the inner part of the body from any kind of injury. It can serve as a selectively permeable surface due to which all of the material present in surrounding cannot pass through it. That means if it is stomach or any other part, let us say kidney, if we can say the surrounding tissue fluid is constantly crossing this boundary, then how the kidney can maintain its internal function and the structure? Not possible. So that barrier is needed over there. So here it is serving as a barrier but in a selective manner. That means it will allow the passage of various different material selectively. So this is all about the epithelial squamous tissue. The different other kinds like cuboidal or ciliated, glandular, all we are going to continue in the next session. So thoroughly go through these particular tissues and you will come to know that with respect to function and its structure where these must be located. Further, we will continue in the next session. Thank you so much. We'll catch you soon in the next part of the session. Till then, goodbye.